Hey, this is Dr. Kelly Cagle, and for season 3, we're doing things a little differently because we know that a healthy and happy dad and mom starts with a healthy and happy husband and wife. So I decided to bring along my husband, Josh, as co-host so we could share some real life stuff of the ways that we learn how to fight to make our marriage thrive. You are listening to season 3 of the Parenting IQ podcast, Learning to Fight. Welcome to episode 4 of the Parenting IQ podcast. I'm here with Mr. Cagle and myself, Kelly. We're so happy for another week. And this week, I'm really excited about this topic because I think that as Josh and I were getting together and planning out today's episode, we were reliving a lot of our childhood memories of our lives of watching our parents fight. And we've also had this conversation time and time again with our friends about how they watch their parents fight and how that has played a role in their marriage relationship. And so we're going to unpack some of those conversations that we've had, not just that we've seen within our families growing up, but also outside of our element. We're going to talk about some of that stuff, some of those fighting scenes that we have seen time and time again. But before we get into that, I want to tell you that if you haven't checked out our YouTube channel yet, it's pretty cute. Our people have done a great job. Amy Ivy, my awesome rock, and Tom and Ivy, they're on top of it, our producers. And so go to Dr. Kelly Cagle on YouTube, check it out, subscribe while you're there because you can watch these episodes face to face. You can kind of see us behind the scenes, what life is like. You can see our Topo Chico that Josh is drinking, my little Celsius because I need some energy. And so here we are, guys. And on our website, drkellycagle.com, we have lots of resources for you. Things that took a lot of prayer and time commitment to put forth so we can bless your home as we feel the Lord has blessed us as far as the vision and heart behind bringing togetherness and transformation of families through his power. So
Amen.
Let's get going with watching your parents fight. Today, we're going to be deepening our marital relationships, starting with communication. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, Josh, can you talk a little bit about verbal, nonverbal, the passive aggressive communication?
Well, I mean, obviously, you got a degree in communication, and it's kind of funny that you're asking me to do that. But one thing that does come to mind is when we talk about communication, all of us think we're great communicators because we know what we're saying, we know what we're thinking, and we're expressing, right? This culture in this day and age, we give our opinions. We want people to know what we think, and we don't hold back.
Yeah.
But what we don't remember or recognize is that really true communication is not what I am saying. It's, am I understanding what you're thinking and how you're receiving this,
Yeah,
right?
that's
And
good.
so many times in our lives, we get wrapped up in the centeredness, the self-centeredness of our own agenda, our own thinking and processing, that really and truthfully we need to put ourselves in other people's shoes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think about that speck in someone's eye,
Yeah.
right? We're so quick to say, hey, this and this about someone or what we might see. But how many times are we supposed to look and reflect inwardly about what are we thinking? How are these people perceiving us?
Yeah. And it's a good point because right now with social media and the platforms that individuals have, it's like WebMD expert, right? We've all become WebMD doctors just because I can Google something and I've got a diagnosis or I've got a platform, whether on Instagram or social or Facebook. And during freaking new presidential election, you can forget it because everybody's an expert. Everybody knows exactly what's happening and everybody has an opinion, a voice. And it's like, well, where's your expertise? Like, what background do you have? Are you really a doctor or are you just diagnosing yourself? Are you really did you go to law school? Not that that's what it takes, but what's your research behind what it is that you're saying? But I think that a lot of times we just forget that And we get so offended by people's opinion just because everybody feels like they have a platform where they can share.
Hmm. Well, and I think so many times when we're talking about how can we build a series around communication, there is, like you were saying, the verbal, the nonverbal. There are so many different dynamics of tone of voice. How we're looking at something. If I'm looking with a smile on my face,
Mm-hmm.
then that speaks something different than if I look like I've got a big frown on my
Yeah.
face. And we discredit these things because we see them as, oh, we're grown-ups, or this is really elementary. But just like what we started this series off with in the very beginning about how do we fight, it's fundamentals. And so
Mm-hmm.
many times when we're wanting to go deeper into communication, we're really just wanting to focus on our fundamentals.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So many times we think about what our parents
Yep.
fight about. And we can also probably put ourselves in our own children's shoes and think, well, how do they perceive what mom and
Yeah.
dad are fighting about?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Because a couple weeks ago, you even brought up the fact that they're watching us, they're mirroring our
All the
behavior and
time.
all these things. And so, even with fighting, we have to, not only are they going to fight with their husband and wife or wife one day, right? They are also going to have to advocate for their needs when it comes to maybe needing a promote or wanting a promotion, applying for, asking for a raise, or, a grade in college. There's advocating, not necessarily fighting, that you always have to do as a human being. So these life skills that we can show them what healthy, not argument, but argument can look like, you know?
Well, I think sometimes we don't realize how close our kids are watching
Yeah.
us. And there's an example one time when I don't have road rage at all. But yeah,
Yeah.
we were sitting at a red light, and Levi was probably, I don't know, 8 years old at the time or something. And we're sitting in this red light, and it's just us. And there's nobody around, and it's not changing. And Levi is like, "Come on, red
Yeah.
light." And I'm just like, "Oh my gosh, that sounds just like me." And
Yep.
and then you start realizing, well, where Levi, no, you can't say that. That's not very nice.
Mhm.
And yet I'm thinking, wow, that is what I'm communicating when I'm
Exactly.
sitting here at this red light impatiently.
Mhm.
And so he's getting this learned behavior,
Mhm.
right, wrong, or indifferent. That's what we've got here.
Yeah.
And so how many of us have had those moments where you're like, oh my goodness, you're
Mhm.
looking really closer than I gave you credit for into my life.
Yeah. And I think that whenever we think about starting out with our choosing your battles wisely, with what you're just saying, that the kids are always watching, which is, I feel like, a common theme for every single episode, because that is the truth. We're mom and dad, and we're learning to fight over here, and so they're always watching. But a big one, I think, is with disciplining the kids, and
Hmm.
that's where I think we can kind of think about how we were disciplined and how we saw our parents, because there's a lot of times parents may not agree with the discipline, with how you're handling a situation, with how you're correcting the behavior of the child. But I think it's huge to make sure that you are on the same page. You brought up, I don't remember, it was a Mike Tyson quote, but it was something about knowing your opponent or whatever. But I think that even with this, you have to have a battle plan. Now that you're going to know, hey, today we're going to have to discipline our kids for X, Y, or Z. But if
Hmm.
it's a behavior that you're seeing time and time again, a lot of times you and I come together, not in front of the children, and I tell you, hey, lately Titus has really been aggravating Micah. And how, I don't know, this is what happened today. Here's an example. I don't know, I don't have anything but swiping toothbrush today, no toothbrush
Goodness.
story. But like, then I come to you and I'm like, let's brainstorm. Let's create a game plan, because I am with them all day, but I want to make sure that I really value your input too when it comes to disciplining the kids. Obviously, it's two of us. They are our children. And I think that you growing up sometimes saw a gap when it came to your parents and their communication with disciplining you guys, right?
Well, I mean, so many times whenever you think about your parents, I still sit back and think, earlier we talked about that Progressive commercial, becoming like your parents. It is just so funny. And sometimes you can be so dead set thinking, I'm not going to become like this, that, or the other. And not that our parents were bad.
No.
It's just that you're always hopefully thinking of growth and how can you
Mhm.
improve and different things in your life. And those are just the people you were close with
Yeah.
to fall back on,
That's who you
right?
were watching.
That's who you're watching. And so I think whenever I was growing up in our parenting or my mom and dad's parenting style, it was open. You know, they were
Yeah.
an open book. And there were, you know, sometimes you would see them frustrated with each other, or we would argue as a family or whatever that we did, but we would also come back and we would have reconciling.
Mhm.
And so I think sometimes though, um, as a kid, you can always pick the one that's going to say yes or no to a
Mhm.
situation, because as a kid, you do become able to learn, hey, this is what my dad is for or against,
Mhm.
this is what my mom's for or against. And what happens, kids are selfish. We
Yeah.
all are selfish. We have to die to those
Yeah.
selfishness ideas and thoughts. But as a kid, you don't really equate that, right?
Mhm.
And you're thinking, hey, I want to go hang out with my friends. I know mom is more likely to say yes than dad.
Mhm.
And then before long, we kind of move over here and we're saying, hey,
You
mom,
know
can
the
we do
parent to
this?
ask.
Right. And so sometimes what you find is that they might not be in unison and then they're fighting,
Mhm.
right? And that now when we're in those moments with our children, we find ourselves as parents recognizing, oh wow, our kids have just tried to thwart
Right.
us, you know? And
Mhm.
then you can get a little frustrated with each other and obviously mad with the
And
kid.
I think that that's where that passive aggressive communication comes in. Then you're just kind of like throwing little daggers here and there, or you just got that nonverbal eye like stare down, and you're like, oh
Mhm.
crap, there's fire coming out of her eyeballs right now,
Mhm.
you know, and you're just like, uh-oh, we were not on the same page there. You can read each other's minds from that moment,
Right.
but the kids don't necessarily need to pick up on that. So you and I have always done this thing that we tell them, whatever question you've got to ask one parent, you're going to get the same answer. And so anytime that they have tried to go and spin that and ask me and I said no, and then ask you and you say maybe or something, and one of us overhears and we're just like, oh no 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 no, we
Mhm.
have a family meeting, and we're like, that's not how we do things, because if mom says no, it's going to be no. So you don't even have to ask dad,
Mhm.
because sometimes we're not on the same page because we didn't have a battle plan for what that moment was going to bring us. You
Right.
know, and my upbringing was slightly different. And I think that that really, with that second point that we bring up every week, what kind of fighter are you? I really think that this is what helped establish that personality in me. My mom and dad, my dad's been a pastor, that he was ordained the day I was 10 months old. So my whole life I've been a pastor's kid, and my parents did not fight in front of us.
Mhm.
You know, I think I always picked up whenever there was probably something happening, but mom and dad did not fight in front of us. And so I was not brought up, and it wasn't in an unhealthy way, but things were not just like, we're going to sit down, we're going to talk about this, we're going to solve this. I think that is why I'm one that the
Sweeps it under the rug.
sweeps it under the rug.
Yeah.
Or now that we're not trying to sweep things under the rug, because that's kind of the culture we're trying to establish,
Mhm.
a fighting culture within our own home, that I need a minute. Let me
Yeah.
just think about this. I need to process this. And this goes back to episode 1, where we talked about that, when that break, the timeout is needed, of I this is a lot for me right now. I need to internalize. I need to come up with my own battle plan, because I have things I need to communicate. And just like Proverbs 18:21 says, the tongue can bring death or life. And so I don't want to say things that I'm going to regret later, you know? And so I think that's where that break is so important when it comes to these watching your parents fight.
Well, and I think just I would encourage the listeners here to reflect back on moments. I mean, we all can remember in childhood of when you might have had a pretty good knockdown drag out with mom or dad or both.
Hmm.
And whether that's slamming doors, which is really a nonverbal, what are you
Yeah.
saying?
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
upset.
Hmm.
Whether it's ignoring or rolling of the eyes or just flat out, you know, screaming and hollering at
Hmm.
each other, whatever it might be, I would encourage each one of us to think back. Let's think back. and decide why and how did our parents fight. And what that can do is that can allow us to come up with some things that might be inward of us that
Mm-hmm.
we need to self-analyze and adjust,
Mm-hmm.
okay? When we're trying to apply the principles of speaking kindness, speaking love, being patient, the reason that we want to have the fruit of the spirit is that's the proper communication
Yeah.
line into everybody,
Yeah.
really, when
Yeah.
you're saying love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control. You can almost dissect each one of those and how communication can play out in joy. How can
Mm-hmm.
communication play out in self-control versus, like you said, vomiting your words out,
Mm-hmm.
which I struggle with. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That self-control, the goal there is to have a pure conversation.
And I think that that's where communication really comes in. If I communicate, hey, you were brought up in a household, and for example, recently I was with a group of girlfriends and we were just talking about actually this. One individual brought up how she was listening with her husband and how they are so similar and how they fight and all these things. And it's really great for me to hear. I'm like, okay, I'm not alone. This is great. I'm not the only household that has, a husband that wants to fight. And then the wife who's just like, I don't want to fight right now. I need a minute to think. I'm not alone here. But one of the other wives was saying how she grew up in a household where they didn't fight. Mom and dad didn't fight and they didn't raise their voice. And it was very like this, and they're just talking. And then her husband, on the other hand, grew up in a household who was the competition of who can scream the loudest is going to win. Complete opposites,
Mhm.
right? And so if they didn't get to the point where they could communicate, first of all, recognize that
Right.
and then communicate what kind of fighter household they grew up in, that really has helped them shape who they are now. Because guess what happened? Probably day two that they were married, they got in a fight.
Mhm.
And then she's like, whoa, 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 whoa. He's screaming. And he's like, I'm not screaming. You've never heard me scream yet. And so it's like, no right or wrong here. It's more of, hey, let's establish our own culture of fighting.
Sure. I just think sometimes we're so hard on ourselves because of the one. I think that the heart, it says that who can figure out the heart? Only the Lord. But I really think that so many times we believe our intentions are good.
Mm-hmm.
But when I hear you tell me that story, I just see balance.
Mm-hmm.
I see, wow, well, you've got someone that really wants to raise their voice and someone that's low, and if they will work on that communication and challenging themselves to
Mm-hmm.
to giving and reaching this resolution based, and really what you end up with is a middle ground
Yeah.
to move forward. Because I think what we want to do in our marriages is understand, guys, we are for each other,
Mm-hmm.
and there are things that we need to make sure that we are trying to communicate
Mm-hmm.
very, very clearly about the values of your home, the values of your marriage, right? We talk about them a lot in business. We talk
Mm-hmm.
about our goals at the new year, or whatever it might be. But every day we need to be making sure that we're instilling something into our kids, into our marriage, into ourselves, right? Whether you can communicate within yourself sometimes. Now you
Mm-hmm.
might look a little crazy walking down the street just having a whole conversation with somebody, or just with yourself
Yeah.
rather. But whenever you're able to say, hey, I'm battling these insecure thoughts, but I'm called to be more than a conqueror. Those are things that you're really communicating.
And I think you then don't allow them to build up layers that shelter your intimacy with one another in your communication. Just yesterday, Levi, who's 12, was asking me, Mom, why do people get a divorce? I just don't understand. And I don't know where that conversation came from, what that thought came from. And so I told him, I said, Levi, sometimes couples just struggle communicating their needs. Life gets really busy. there's work and career to go and pursue and achieve, and school and all the demands of providing and all of the things, right? The weight of parenting kids alone is a huge one, that you then create this space between you that just then grows deeper and deeper. And then he said, um, well, then why get married why marry that person in the first place? He's so black or white. He hasn't even experienced the weight of trying to cohabitate with another individual. You know what I mean? Like
Sure.
he has no worries. He's provided for. Food's on the table. We get in places, all the things. He doesn't know the toll it takes to juggle all of that. And so, and we really make sure to tell them every time you and I go on dates, because a lot of times we drop them off at Lifetime for a parents' night out because we get 3 hours. And in the beginning, they don't want to go. And we're like, no. This is mom and dad's time. You want a happy mommy and daddy? Then you want mommy and daddy to go on dates, because we also need to communicate with them why we're doing this.
Well, and maybe you're a listener here and you're sitting, well, I wonder, how can I even have a conversation without it getting tense? Or how can I even begin to start reconciliation with my spouse? I would really encourage you to first and foremost understand that you can call on the Lord and He will be there. He is your ever present help in time of need. But I think that God is such a unifying God, and the thing about marriage is when we are really at our best, we're making the same decisions. It might be that we see them differently, right? Like a goal, for example, of cleaning the house. Yours is maybe to vacuum, mine's to do the windows, but at the end of the day, the goal is to get the house clean. And I think what we're trying to say here is that we recognize first and foremost that us creating this topics of this podcast is just to say, hey, there's a battle out there for against marriage, and communication is a vital piece. And so a lot of this, ways to come in and seek this reconciliation is, first and foremost, we got to humble ourselves.
Yeah, that actually is my next point. The respect one another, which is our third point, is the walking in humility.
Well, and when you think about respect, but yet you feel like you've been disrespected 46 times over, and then it's like, I don't want to, every time I try, I get chopped back down, or whatever it is. And maybe it's really true. Okay. So it is so difficult. I mean, you and I, even when we come and we want to talk about some of this stuff that we want to talk about,
you said,
guys,
just yesterday,
we spend a few minutes. Well, shoot, it could be longer than that.
You even said, I wish there was a video of us hashing out.
Yeah, trying to figure out these ideas.
All these, because you are very like, I'm going to go with the flow. And I'm not that way. If you're watching on YouTube, you see I've got the paper.
Yeah,
Josh
she's
has
got
nothing.
like a comma behind a sentence that I'm supposed to pause on or something, and it's like crazy. Well, and our heart behind all this is that we want to partner with other marriages in life. We want to do life together. We want all of us to understand that we're going to win. We need to have a winning mentality, even when there's fights, even when there's moments of attack. But I think so many times where I've found that I've been in complete unalignment or just hostility towards you is when I've decided to die on this hill. I'm going to say this. I'm going to just go there. And basically what I've decided is, hey, I'm proud, and you're going to feel this. And it doesn't matter what topic. We could get into anything, right? Whether it's about the kids, whether it's about, us and how we think. I think so many times the way to seek reconciliations on your knees and humbling yourself before your spouse. Because at that point, we find ourselves on a level playing field, right? And so to me, I think whenever we are trying to analyze, because I really believe that if we can try to look back at our parents, it's funny because when you all have your first kid, what's so funny is we're sitting here trying to tell our parents how our first kid needs to be treated, or mom and dad, this is how you put them to sleep.
Yep.
It's almost like we didn't make it,
This
right?
is how you change the diaper. And it's like, I've never changed a
Yeah.
diaper before. Thank you for teaching me that.
And they're probably somewhat frustrated, but also smiling in their own way. And then by our third kid, it's like, oh dang, he was left out in the garage, next to
I
the
don't
garbage.
care how you change the diaper, just change it.
Right? But so many times we can learn so much from our parents, whether they were involved or not. You can still learn. It's that lifelong learning mentality that you talk about a lot. We still, it's like if you're a batter in baseball, you're throwing a fastball or you're throwing a curveball, you're not able to decide. What you have to do is learn how to hit the pitch you're thrown. And I think so many times in our lives, we have to make sure in our marriage that we're identifying that, hey, I've just got to step up to the plate and play ball, no matter what the pitch.
And I think that part of respecting one another is understanding that we are all human. I fall short every single day. And so whenever I do, I'm typically not the first one to apologize. You typically are the first one. But that's where my pride comes in. That vulnerability I talked about a couple episodes ago, that it's hard for me to be vulnerable, but it's necessary. And so for me, realizing that, man, if I just let go of that stinking pride and just come to you because you're my best mate. And so it's just like, why do I feel like I need to prove a point or win or do? It's not about that. So it's letting go of my pride and also extending grace towards you whenever you do fall short. For example, talking about the disciplining of the kids. If we get to a point that you are disciplining them and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's exactly against what I would have done.
Right.
Instead of in that moment throwing daggers or making some passive aggressive comment, well, why don't you just clean up your own mess before you? What unnecessary? You are showing the child that you are not in agreement, right? So I think that you can just pause in your thoughts. You can be thinking that, but then later come back and debrief from that moment. Hey, remember whenever that happened? Here's an alternative. Here's what I was thinking. Here's something else for us to think about and have grace towards one another. That's the respect, right? We are a team and we can respect one another, that I'm going to fall and you're going to fall. And we're still going to come and extend grace and be humble enough to know that even in our weaknesses, we are here to make each other better and learn from those mistakes, those moments that we fail or fall short.
Yeah, and inside that, we're also speaking to our kids one way or the other, that when we do those things, they see that mom and dad are in unity. Because it is important for what we're trying to do is to raise them up. We're not going to be with them every day, all the time as they get older. And it can be a fearful thing in some regards. But again, this power of the communication and what we want to accomplish, it's only going to happen with intentionality and focus.
Yeah.
And so when we do these things as a marriage, in the stories that we hear, with friends or family, when they talk about their ways that they tag up or that they raise kids, I love listening to how people live life. It's such a colorful thing. And definitely when we're getting feedback in on some topics of what the audience would want to hear on fighting, obviously it's such a good thing because, again, you're not alone.
Yeah.
It happens. So, but it's okay. It's okay. But we're deciding that, hey, just like our vows that we all took, right? For better, for worse, for rich, for poor, and sickness and in health, all these different things that we're doing, we are communicating that, hey, no matter what, we're going to walk through thick or thin. And maybe we failed. Maybe you're in a broken home. Maybe you're in a home that's transitioning in an opposite direction than what you want. That doesn't mean that life's over. It doesn't mean that you stay in the clay, in the muck, right? What you're doing is you're deciding, hey, I've got to figure out, I've just got to put one foot in front of the other. I think about Bear Grylls one time he showed people how to get out of quicksand.
Yeah.
And what is so crazy about how you get out of quicksand is you really you swim. You start to try to swim out of quicksand. Basically, you're laying flat on the water, which would be the total opposite of what I
Yeah.
would have thought, right? But you're starting to put this effort into moving forward. And because if you don't, you're going to stay in that. You're going to get stuck. It's going to consume you.
Hmm.
And that's what we want to make sure that what our life and that power of how we communicate to ourselves and to our
Hmm.
spouses is so important.
Yeah. Yeah. Because ultimately, it's what I say time and time again every week is that we are two separate people.
Yeah.
You have your own needs, your own ways, your own job, your own things that you're pursuing, your own mind, your own heart, how your unique things that God made you. And I've got all mine. But then we are somehow coming together as one. But God knew all of that. And because He created marriage for this. So He knew that it wouldn't be easy, but it was definitely possible. So it's that effort that you make up your mind that you say, hey, we are two different people, but we're on the same team. So we're going to fight for our marriage and for unity. So if you enjoyed this episode, I hope that you share it with a friend. Make sure that you follow us and subscribe to the Parenting IQ podcast. I'm over here thinking YouTube podcast, all these things in my mind, but YouTube channel too, guys. drkellycagle.com. And we will see you next week to continue our communication series.